Hello, it's Anthony Chadwick from VETchat, welcoming you to another of our episodes. Really pleased to have Hugo Richardson on the line today, who is the owner and founder of the Nordic Locums. Hugo, welcome.
Hi, Anthony. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, great to see you, and some lovely plants in the background there.
Yeah, nice to have an office where I can work with a bit of greenery around me, rather than a sterile veterinary clinic. Sometimes it's nice to have a bit of plants. Yeah, for sure.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. Obviously, you are a veterinary surgeon, qualified a little while ago now. You're no longer a young vet, are you? We can't class you as a young vet anymore.
I still feel like a young vet, Anthony. Still feel.
So do I.
Yeah, good. So yes, I graduated back in 2007 now. So I've been working as a clinical vet for pretty much 15 years. And yeah, it's been a really interesting ride. A mixture of, I started out as a mixed practice vet doing cattle and horses and cats and dogs in Taunton in Somerset for a couple of years. And that was a really good introduction to veterinary because really nice mixed practice, really supportive colleagues. Kind of really thrown in at the deep end, but supported. So, doing lots of surgery from day one, doing lots of, spays and castrates really quite from early on, as well as all the farm visits and equine stuff. So it really was a good opportunity for me to experience everything, the broad range of the veterinary clinical work. But then after a couple of years, I got given a fabulous opportunity to go and do a master's degree with the Royal Veterinary College, RVC, and combined with the Zoological Society of London, ZSL, at London Zoo. And it was something called Wild Animal Health. And it was really it was a master's degree looking at wildlife conservation, and the benefits and threats really from wildlife in terms of emerging infectious disease, global pandemics, and as well as managing the collections within the zoo, both at Whipsnade and at London Zoo. So I spent a lot of time with there. One of my projects while I was there was actually reviewing the anesthesia for the Przewalski horses that they have, which are these original kind of wild horses, and from the Mongolian steppes. And not many anesthesias on them. They're pretty wild. They don't react like a normal horse to anesthesia. And we were looking at what was successful, what hadn't been successful in the past, and trying to come up with a new protocol. Yeah, as well as global pandemics and interesting chats from virologists while we were there about avian influenza and swine flu. A big swine flu pandemic going on while I was there back in 2010, and everyone was worried about evolving variants coming out of Mexico, and projections, and also avian influenza was brewing. The H5N1 original one was brewing at that time too. Yeah.
I remember I moved my practice in 2010. No, 2000 it was 2009, I think it was, and there was quite a bad, I think it was avian, but it might have been swine flu that was going through at that time as well. And I got quite sick just before the opening, actually, and had to drag myself out of bed to go to it. And of course, our whole attitude towards pandemics has changed because we're in the middle of an avian flu pandemic at the moment. And obviously, I've just had 2 or 3 years in COVID. And I suppose we haven't learned a lot of lessons, that from things like Ebola and MERS. We weren't really as prepared as we should be for the coronavirus when it hit, were we?
No, I think like all things with big governments is that no one wants to do the legwork to prepare for them until it's actually happened. And as we know, with wildlife conservation as a classic example, we all sit here and we watch, elephant numbers decline and cheetah numbers decline, and sea creatures, whale numbers. Well, some of the whales are coming back, but all are with the overfishing. And until we're in a desperate scenario, no one's wants to intervene. And it costs, the factor is it costs so much more to intervene at a later stage than if we intervened early, especially in terms of biodiversity loss and all that kind of stuff. So, it can be immensely frustrating working and studying these examples of biodiversity loss, because it's not until it's catastrophic that people say, actually, we need to do something about it. And had they intervened earlier, 5-10 years earlier, you could have really made a big difference.
I think it was the same with the foot and mouth outbreak in 2001, where the government had cut back on veterinary investigation centres and so on. And then suddenly, when it did hit, we didn't really have the infrastructure to cope with it. And of course, there was, it cost the livelihoods of a lot of farmers, but also billions and billions of pounds. And this is the problem by not preparing in the good times and having that disaster management ready, is it?
Well, there's a great story about that. I think it might be a myth, but basically someone had written the kind of disaster guide management to foot and mouth in the 1970s after the previous big foot and mouth outbreak, and it lay, unread on a shelf for 30 years. And so I think someone discovered it, after the last foot and mouth outbreak and read it, and it basically was a kind of noddy's guide to how to deal with the another foot and mouth disease outbreak. And no one had remembered it or read it, or
Hmm.
and I think, had people been refreshed on the idea and understanding that, maybe a lot of changes could have been made, and interventions done earlier.
Hmm.
But whether or not that's a true story or not, but it just, it highlights a kind of historical repetition of these kind of things. And again, if there's a big enough gap between big outbreaks, the people who experience them, it's a bit like, market shocks and changes we have in the finance sector. If enough people, if it's been too long since the last, big
Yes.
decline, then we've lost that experience in the market and within the veterinary sector of what to do in these events. And so new people come along, they don't really know, and they've got to learn it every time. Yeah, it's very frustrating. It can be.
I think that's almost another podcast, but I've just finished reading Donut Economics by Kate Raworth, who's an economist, and very much saying actually the way that the economic system is built is completely wrong, because we have these boom and busts rather than accepting maybe now, as a very mature economy, that we're not going to have huge amounts of growth, but we're going to steadily grow. And actually, if we are obsessed with the money side and not with the welfare side, then we're not getting the balance right. Because actually, after a certain amount of money, it doesn't bring happiness, does it? And I know, sort of jumping on a little bit, this is really part of your experience, having worked in the UK, done the masters, done a lot of locuming while you were doing the masters to sort of cover that. You then started to also have some experiences working in Scandinavia. I think Norway was the first place. I think your wife is also, she half Swedish.
So yes. So, well, it started off. So my wife is half Swedish, and her parents live in the south of Sweden, and we were kind of been talking over a number of years about maybe, we have got young children now, and maybe the opportunities of growing a family in Scandinavia are maybe are better potentially than the UK. And yet, my worry was, I'm a UK vet, UK trained. I don't speak Scandinavian, neither Norwegian or Swedish. How would that work? And I had a conversation. A friend of a friend basically got in contact with me, who was running a veterinary clinic in Bergen in Norway, and we had a discussion. And they don't have a kind of locum industry in Scandinavia, per se, and he wanted to understand how it worked in the UK, and he understood there was a big locum industry in the UK, and in Scandinavia they have a real issue where they struggle to fill their summer months, particularly kind of May to September, because in Scandinavia it's kind of mandatory to give your employees, whatever type of organization you work for, a minimum of 3 consecutive weeks holiday between the 1st of June and the 31st of August. And many of the Scandinavian people save their entire annual holiday allowance and take it all at that time. So they may be off for 4 or 6 weeks, or even longer potentially over the summer months.
Mm.
Um, and the problem within Scandinavia is this: it happens to coincide with the peak amount of admissions to veterinary hospitals at that point, because everyone's at home, they're on holiday. It's a good time to take your dog or cat to get vaccinated, or if you're out and about running around, there's a lot of outdoor activities with pets. They have high incidence of injuries, or quite commonly in Scandinavia in the summer months is snake bite injuries. They have the European adder, and that's quite active at that time, so they see quite a lot of snake bites. So the clinic is busy at that point, but then staff numbers are low, and they
Mm.
wanted to see how it could work with locums or temporary vets, and they wanted to initially try with English-speaking vets, because everyone really speaks very good English in Scandinavian countries, and they asked if I'd go out and work there. So I thought, great opportunity to try a bit of Scandinavia, see what veterinary is like in Norway, and packed my bags. I had to took a bit of work, understanding the legislation for getting licensed and whether, luckily the VDS covered my professional indemnity insurance and all that kind of stuff. And then understanding taxes, had to chat to accountants and understand how it worked with being paid internationally. And then off I went and was totally blown away, really. The clinic I worked in was, custom built. It was huge. They had about I think 20 vets working in the building, and they had everything from specialist orthopedic surgeons, specialist soft tissue surgeons. They had specialist ultrasonographers. They had even a whole team of lab technicians. So it was a bit like having IDEX in the room next door. And it was, so I suppose it was akin to working in the UK in a referral hospital, but doing first opinion care. And so for me as a vet who's, would like to practice veterinary to a really good high standard, lots of my cases that I see, particularly in London, end up being referred off to, tertiary referral hospitals. So I rarely get to see cases all the way to the end, especially with the complex ones, which are interesting. Whereas there, they rarely refer anything out. So everything would just be managed in-house. And an orthopedic surgeon, if I need an assessment, I'd go over and knock on his door and say, can you look at these x-rays or look at this image? And they were equipped with very high standards, so CT and MRI. And even though I wasn't able to interpret those images myself, I'm not skilled MRI or CT, radiographer, they would have people that could do that and instantly come up with reports and say, look, this is good, and we can fix this tomorrow. And the flip side of that, of course, was that in Scandinavia, there's a very high level of insurance, about 90% insurance level within Scandinavia. So I wasn't having to have those conversations of should we do an X-ray or should we do an ultrasound or should we do this particular blood, or I'm worried about this, which of course is very common in the UK. Whereas there, they say, look, insurance, if it needs to be done, do it. Obviously, they're not expecting you to spend money unnecessarily, but it just means that you're able to offer a very high standard of care, so gold standard veterinary care to these cases, which was, very fulfilling as a vet to have that opportunity.
I know
really enjoyed it.
Agria was one of the first companies to do insurance, and I think you're right. In Sweden, it's something like 90% of animals are insured, aren't they?
Yeah, very high levels, and it's affordable for some reason. I don't know how they keep it, but it seems to be affordable for the majority of people who have pets. And they're happy to pay the insurance, and so it makes the whole management of complex cases much easier, because there isn't so much of an issue about finances. No, definitely. It was a very good experience. And the other thing that I loved when I was out there, of course, is, as I'm sure you've travelled out to Bergen before, the Norwegians are totally mad when it comes to outdoor activities. So a lovely thing would happen at the end of an evening of work. I'd be pretty tired, end of the day, 6 o'clock or so, 5 o'clock, and they'd say, what are you doing now? What's your plan? And I'd be pretty knackered, and I'd say, well, I'll probably go home and cook something and watch a bit of Netflix and go to bed. And it's the summer months, so it's daylight until 12 o'clock at night, really. Only dark for a couple of hours. And they'd say, no, we've got to do something. Let's go whale watching. And you're like, what, whale watching? And they'd say, yeah, come on, I'll pick you up. So they'd drive me off, to the shoreline, and we'd jump in a couple of canoes and start kayaking out of the fjord, to the open sea. And I'm there, looking back and going, well, what, once we're paddling out a bit, I was a bit like, so what happens if I fall in? And they said, well, can you kayak? And I'm a bit like, well, you probably should have asked that before I started, but yes, just about. And they said, well, don't fall in. They said, don't, because it's a very long swim home. And at that point, we're paddling out to the open sea to look for whales. And that kind of experience, repeated itself, whether it was hiking or, kayaking out to the little islands amongst some of the fjords there and having a beer and a barbecue. That was really common. 4 or 5 of you would go out, kayak or canoe out, and then someone would pull out a barbecue from their backpack and, someone else some sausages and some other things and a couple of beers, and you'd sit there, until, 11, 12 o'clock at night, just chatting and drinking and having a nice time. And it was a really magical experience. I really, really, really enjoyed it.
The Scandinavians are well known in the league tables for happiness, aren't they? They seem to do really well there. It's just a very relaxed and, I think, family orientated way of life, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, just culturally, they seem to have a really strong idea about work-life balance. Very different to, the other extreme, which would be kind of USA American style, which is work, 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 and your job is everything. Scandinavia is very much, and it's reflected whether you're in Denmark or Norway or Sweden. Um, you know, you very much work to live rather than live to work, and so
Mm,
strict working conditions, very very strict within the working regulations for employment law is an 8-hour working day, and within 1 hour lunch break included in that, so it's a 9-hour day in total. And you have these breaks, and I'm sure people will have heard in Scandinavia, particularly in Sweden, something called fika. Now fika is
mm,
a kind of institution within Sweden, and coffee breaks within Norway too. But if you were to have a job and you didn't take your fika break at 11 o'clock, for example, I mean, there would be everyone would stop. There'd be a riot. Everyone would stop
mm,
down tools and stop working, because fika is basically half an hour coffee break and pastries at about 11 o'clock in the morning, 10:30, 11, and you're expected to participate, and you're expected to chat to your colleagues. You're not allowed to talk about work, and it's a way of communicating and meeting people. And then again, so you get the fika, you get your lunch break, and then you get your strict, finish time. And Norway or Sweden was the same, because I've worked in both. If I'm still there at 6 minutes past or 5 minutes past six when I should have finished at six, people start to look at you like you're very strange, and they say, why are you still here? And you're like, well, I'm busy. I've got cases. I've got lots to get on. And in the UK, you're just expected to keep working until it's all finished. And there they go, no, no, give your cases to someone else. It's finished.
mm.
You don't have to work. There's no expectation to carry on
No.
working. I mean, obviously, if you've got interesting cases and you want to stay, then sure. But there's no expectation, and they very much think that you should be taking your time off and going home to be with your family, or having a
Mm,
break, or resting.
mm,
And it was such a nice attitude, and that's really ingrained from a cultural level. It's not just a particular working practice within the clinic. It doesn't matter whether it's veterinary or a doctor, or engineers, or
mm.
whatever kind of profession you're in. Break times sacrosanct, lunchtime is sacrosanct, and finishing on time is sacrosanct. It's a very healthy attitude, I think,
Mm.
and I think a
Well,
lot that we could learn from. Sure.
I think you're right, Hugo, because we at Webinar Vet talk a lot about sustainability, and obviously I'm talking about environmental sustainability, but actually, what's just as important, or almost as important, is that we actually have a sustainable veterinary profession. And if we push people too hard and they say this isn't fun anymore, they leave, and it's such a shame, because I think I've been a vet for over 30 years, and I've really enjoyed my career in all the things, in clinical, plus we've just been 13 years as Webinar Vet. So that was founded about 13 years ago, when nobody knew what a webinar was. As I was saying to people during the pandemic, we've been planning for the pandemic for the last 10 years, just nobody
Yeah.
realised. So maybe slightly better than the government, but there we go. It's probably not difficult. Um, but I think it's so important to have a sustainable profession, isn't it? And having that ability to take that time off. I've certainly heard people talk about not being too busy that they couldn't urinate. I mean, that cannot be right. It's just simply a recipe for cystitis and other diseases. So having those breaks, and in fact, again, I really try and encourage people, the business, to take breaks, but it is part of our culture. Oh no, we haven't got time. Whereas actually, it's so important to sit down and have those coffee breaks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's part of sense of self. By being busy, we feel important. We're
Yes.
like, oh, we're very important. We're busy, and I can't talk to you, and I can't do this. But for a sustainable work balance, life balance, it's just,
Mm,
and it's certainly within the veterinary industry, particularly where it is stressful. You are dealing with challenging circumstances, with clients with sick pets who are worried, and there's high levels of stress and anxiety. That
mm,
anxiety and stress does feed into us, and how we manage that. And of course, as veterinary has become more complicated, there's more you can do, a lot more with it. The clients expect you to be
mm,
have this very very high level of knowledge constantly, and it is a very stressful. If you don't have the answer straight away,
mm,
your clients have all Googled everything. They know almost as much as you about a particular disease, um, and and so it can be a very stressful, high intense profession to be in, and it's
mm,
very important that we take time, we take a break, and time management is key. It's got to be key. And if it's, if you're forced into 5 or 10-minute consultations back to back all day without any break, that's not a way to live. From a career, for a long-term career. Sure, you can do it for a year, you can do it for 2 years, and then you burn out. And then what do you do? Then you feel depressed, and you don't want to work in the veterinary career again. And we're losing these very high skilled individuals out of the profession, and we have to change, because it seems mad that we're training vets up 5-6 years in university. These are very high achieving individuals, very bright, putting them into clinical practice, and it's a bit like, cannon fodder. The first couple of years are stressful anyway, because you're learning really the job. And then if you can't find a sustainable way of working after that, then of course you're going to leave, and it's a huge loss to the profession. So so from my opinion, when I went out and worked in Scandinavia, I just saw that it's a different way of working, which for me was more sustainable. And yes, I was working, for a big corporate, and yet the corporates there are not the big monsters that there seem to be here in the UK. They seem to have, and I think probably just because the law around working hours is so strict, and culturally it's all ingrained, is that they're not able to lengthen day length of working hours, and not pay you anymore, and get you to do extra shifts unnecessarily. And so it is a more sustainable culture, and I think that's hugely beneficial, and I think you've got a lot to learn from that. And if we can incorporate, so for success for me, when I send vets to go out and work in Scandinavia myself, is if I have a vet who's gone out and had a good time and experienced a really fun working environment, and then come home, that is success for me. I don't mind whether they're there for 2 months, for 6 months, or they move permanently. It's about, can you take some of those principles from Scandinavian culture and bring them home and incorporate them into your everyday working life, because that's the only way we're gonna change our profession, I think.
I think you're right. We have so much to learn from them. They seem to be, they have quite high taxes in Scandinavia, in Norway and in Sweden, but they understand that they get the service for it. So their health service, I think, runs efficiently. They have, good teacher student numbers and things. So there's definitely an advantage. Whereas I think in the UK, we seem to be a bit obsessed with low tax. And low tax means that we haven't got as much money to spend on public service, and then we suffer in those areas, don't we?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, trying to compare salaries from the UK and Scandinavia, vets always talk to me and they say, well, in the UK, I'm being offered, X, 50, 60, 70,000 pounds, whatever it is. And then you go to Scandinavia and this is for a permanent role rather than temporary, but as a permanent role, they might be being offered 25% less or 20% less equivalent. And they go, well, I don't think I can make the move because it's not affordable. And I say, well, hang on a sec, listen, look, what are the numbers at the end of the month? What are you spending it on? And look at these other factors. So in Scandinavia, the cost of childcare is very low. I've got young children myself. I've got 2 young kids, and we are spending, a fortune on childcare. Equivalent rates. If let's say I'm spending £1,500 to £2,000 a month on childcare, full-time childcare. In Scandinavia, the equivalent is about £200 a month, because there's so much state support for it. And other things, so that the pension is very generous in Scandinavia, the state pension. So you don't really need to save for a pension, whereas in the UK you do need to add. So after your taxed income, you're putting money into a pension. The cost of accommodation, housing, unless you're living in Stockholm or in Oslo, you can buy a big house, 4-bedroom house with land for relatively very little, whereas in the UK we're really kind of squeezed in on land, and land's expensive. So you're not paying a huge mortgage costs, you're not paying childcare costs, medical infrastructure, medical is free. You pay in Sweden, you pay £10 every time you visit your GP, and that's it. And so there are huge benefits, and the state is very supportive. And so we talk about high taxes in Scandinavia, but the benefits are so great that they offset each other. So that when you come to the end of the month, effectively your salary from a veterinary job or whatever job in Scandinavia is a pocket money, because that's your spending money. Whereas in the UK, you get it, you pay your tax on it, and then you have to then start savings for childcare, university, all this other stuff for your own family. And also the maternity benefits for young families, and we should probably touch on this because a lot of our industry is female, and Scandinavia, it's a standard 18 months maternity leave is quite common, full pay, and then you have a kind of half pay feeding you back into work, encouraging you back to work. So it's there's huge support for working mothers, as well as cheap childcare. So it's very common for someone who's got one or two or three kids to still be working in Scandinavia, and that's hugely important.
Hmm. And obviously, you've done the locuming for a bit, but then saw that this was really beneficial to you, and we've sort of jumped ahead a little bit. You obviously founded Nordic Locums. So when was that actually founded?
So, well, I worked in Norway, and then I went and did the same job again the following summer in Sweden, and then went back to Norway. And I wrote up my experiences in the veterinary press at the time. The clinics that I was dealing with said, "Look, Hugo, this has worked out really, really well. We really want more vets like you to come out and work for us in Scandinavia." So I had these clinics saying they needed more people. I had colleagues of mine getting in contact saying, "Hugo, amazing what you did in Sweden, Scandinavia. We'd love to experience the same thing. How do we do that?" So initially, I just was helping people, do the paperwork, and I was saying, "Well, this is what I've done, and you need to contact this
Hmm.
person, and you need to do that." And then it started getting a bit of momentum, and the clinic saying, "Well, Hugo, have you got anyone else you could send us? Send us our way." And so quickly, I realized that there was an opportunity there to help people, and so I started doing it just as a side job, my side hustle, as I called it, while still working clinically. And I was just working out of my spare bedroom, just with a laptop, and just trying to keep track of people and helping them. And over time, it just snowballed. It just grew and grew and grew. We had more vets interested, more clinics, by word of mouth. Like everything within the veterinary sector, it's very commonly is word of mouth. So more and more people getting on board. And so my own job just got busier and busier, and I was trying to manage young kids, clinical work, and Nordic Locums. And we started Nordic Locums properly, and I think it was probably like 2016 was probably when I started it. And yeah, and it's just grown. And I took the decision in July, or just a bit before, that I couldn't maintain that level of work of Nordic Locums and kids and clinical work. So I elected to step back from the clinical work in July of last year, and focus full time on this, as well as more childcare, spending more time with kids,
Hmm.
and it's worked out really well. And so we're very busy. Lots of interested people, lots of interested clinics, and it's just about helping vets, overcome some of those hurdles. And the two big hurdles I'd say are probably, reticence to try it. Oh, we've got a
I
cat that sits
apologise. I
down.
did say
That's
the
all right.
cat at some point might join us.
That's fine. I'd say the biggest hurdle really is reticence. People are nervous about trying something new. Going abroad, it is quite scary. What's it going to be like working in a different country? Is the language a problem? Do they have the same drugs?
Hmm.
All this kind of stuff. So a lot of my job initially when chatting to vets is talking to them about my experiences out there, and how great it was and how much I enjoyed it. And then the second part of the job really is then saying, right, if you're interested, I've got clinics that'll take you. Let's get you, all the paperwork approved so that you're there working legally and happily, and there aren't any problems. And then once they're in situ working, we're here as a kind of sounding board, or just advisory role to help them. If they ring me up and say, Hugo, I don't understand about this, or I'm having trouble with that, or can you help me find some accommodation? That's what we're here to help them with, and sort out all the problems. And because we've been doing it for a number of years now, we've heard most of the questions. So it's not
Yes.
uncommon to hear the same thing over and over and say, "Oh, that's right, we had this before." Or other things, often vets say, "Oh, have you got someone I could talk to who's worked in that place before that can give me some pointers?" And absolutely, I'll contact them, send them an email, say, "Would you speak to this person?" Or have a conversation on the phone. So we very much see ourselves as an organisation that holds vets by the hand and leads them to the opportunity of working abroad. And whether it's just for a few months, a couple of months, couple of years, whatever they want, we're here to try and help them get that opportunity. And it's a great one.
Suppose I have to ask the question, Hugo. Has there been any romances or marriages through Nordic Locums? Has that happened yet?
Yeah, there has actually, not uncommon. Obviously, the clinics. There's a lot of women in the veterinary industry, vice versa. So the Swedish clinics are very keen for male vets, as is everywhere, I think. But we have had a couple of vets who've gone out and fallen in love and then decided to stay there, and that's been great and a really nice thing to see. Yeah, absolutely. Although we're not selling it as a dating agency, but
Yes, I was going to
very
say,
much.
but there's a touch of that going on.
Well, inevitably, when you're working very closely
Yes.
with colleagues
Yeah.
in that environment, in a nice place, and again, a lot of the kind of vets that want to go out are vets in the age group of 2 or 3 years qualified to kind of 10 years qualified, and that age range probably puts them in the age of kind of 25 to 35. And often they're single or aren't married with kids, so they have the opportunity to go abroad and to work a bit, and inevitably you're going to find people that you like and spend time with, and hopefully that leads to something. But yeah, if it does, magic. If it doesn't, that's also fine too. But take the
I
experience.
think change is something that the profession, has been known to be quite conservative. So I suppose it can be difficult. You're going somewhere where you're not going to speak the language. And yet, as you said, as I've certainly experienced, uh, the Scandinavians speak exquisite English, don't they?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, embarrassingly good English. It's very common when I'm doing a consultation, out there. I always ask them at the beginning or in the waiting room, are you happy if we talk in English? And it's really funny because often, they might be a bit nervous and they say, oh, not really. And then you're like, oh, okay. So then you have a nurse or a colleague do some of the
Yes.
translation, and at the end of the consult, I say, well, like, do you understand what we've talked about? And I chat to my nursing assistant. I say, can you just check? And they'll reply in fluent English, almost better English than me, and they do understand it totally. They just are nervous about speaking English because it's
Yeah.
certainly the older generation. I mean, the younger generation speak fluent English, so anyone under the age of 50, you're not going to have any problems with at all in terms of language and communication. Maybe some of the older ones in the more rural areas, are just more reluctant to, but they understand everything. Um,
And it's
so
nice
language
for
is
us
not a
to also pick up some of the words so that we can speak to them as well. So presumably over a couple of summers, you pick up a bit of Swedish and Danish or
yeah.
Norwegian.
Yeah, I often say that you talk Swinglish, when I'm
Yes.
working in Sweden, because sure, the first couple of weeks are a bit of a challenge. The computer system often is either in Norwegian or Swedish, and so it's kind of challenging to navigate through the various different panels. But you quite quickly pick up the different words for various different,
Yeah.
X-ray, ears, eyes, all the kind of anatomical questions, quite names quickly come together, and then often it's about learning the pronunciation of them because they're written in a certain way, and then you say it to them, and they look at you like you're bit strange, and then you say no, 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 this word, and they go and then they teach
Yeah.
you the pronunciation. So
Yeah.
it is fun, and yeah, and it's just great opportunity to experience working in a different culture, and the nicest thing I find with vets that come on board to us is that they say, look, I really want to travel and be somewhere, but I don't want to just be there on holiday. I want to really understand a culture and get under
Mm.
the skin of it a bit. Um, and I think working in an environment like that is great because you can be there for a few months and really experience a day-to-day working life of some of these people and how good it can be.
So, Hugo, why do you think vets are coming to Nordic Vets?
I mean, the majority of our vets who come to approach us are either locums themselves or looking for a bit of a change in their career. Perhaps they might be a bit dissatisfied with their current role, and they're really just looking for a bit of adventure. It's very popular for vets who want just to try working in a different country, just get a bit of opportunity to work abroad. A bit of a cultural experience, a cultural exchange, really, to try something different. And people come to us for a couple of months. I mean, on average, they're coming for between 2 and 6 months working in the Scandinavian countries. That's a really good opportunity. And many of our vets, having been out to experience working in Scandinavia, come back, year on year. So it's not just a single one-off thing,
Mm.
but it's particularly vets who just want to change the scene and looking for a sense of adventure. And also more recently, obviously following the changes with Brexit, many European vets who would have previously worked in the UK are now finding that quite a bit harder because of the visa and
Mm.
licensing requirement change. So we have now a lot of vets that come on board to us and say, look, I really like the level of care and standard that the UK is able to provide for vets and pets. what is there alternatives? And Scandinavia has a very high quality of care. They're able to offer good professional development for vets, and high levels of insurance and good levels of pay. So
Yeah.
quite a natural kind of thing for EU vets to come on board through to us that way.
What are the clinics looking for, Hugo? Have they got particular requirements as well?
Yeah, I mean, so the clinics are not looking for new grads, really. I mean, like any business, what they want is a well experienced vet. So kind of if you've got 3 to 5 years of clinical experience, you've seen a bit of everything. So you're a good general all round first opinion vet. They particularly like vets that are comfortable with out of hours and emergency critical care. So a day vet, night vet, weekend vet, that's what they really like. Obviously, a good level of English, spoken and written English is essential, because all of it's going to be in English. You don't need to speak Swedish or Norwegian, or Finnish or Danish. But good English is absolutely important. And our vets are looking to ideally stay anywhere up to 6 months for a temporary role, or obviously longer if they want a permanent run too. So ability to commit to 3 to 6 months work, particularly over the summer period, so anywhere between kind of May and September. But we are supplying vets all year round. And the clinics, yeah, they just want good, all-round first opinion vets. They're not expecting specialists. I mean, obviously, if you are doing a certificate in something, that's really beneficial. But a good first opinion vet is what they're looking for.
And usually more likely small animal than mixed practice.
Absolutely. I mean, the majority of the clinics that we work with are hospitals. These are large hospitals, 10 to 20 vets working in the building at any one time. So they're busy, big first opinion, custom built hospitals. A bit like working in a referral centre in the UK or equivalent, but more kind of doing first opinion care.
Yeah.
And quite commonly in the summertime, there's a lot of new grads from Sweden or Norway as well working. A lot of the students start work in May or June, and so there's the opportunity where a lot of them need some help. They come to you and they say, Hugo, can you help me with this radiograph? Or I've got this clinical case and I think it might be. And they very often choose a kind of the most bizarre diagnosis, an uncommon diagnosis or rare, and you think, well, it's possible, but maybe I like to say common things are common. So let's look at this and apply first principles and see. So there's a little bit of teaching involved as well for some of the new grads, which is why you'd struggle if you're a new grad, applying for these positions.
No, that's great. That makes sense. And for accommodation, is that something that you sort out, or does the practice sort out, or do they have to sort out themselves?
Yeah, so the clinic will find accommodation for all the vets. That's quite normal because they know what's close by, what works in terms of accessing the clinic and stuff. And it really depends on whereabouts you are. If you're in the big central cities, so like Stockholm or Oslo and stuff, then accommodation, is a bit more expensive. And generally the clinics will find it, but they ask the vets to contribute a little bit towards the cost. But it's not expensive in terms of just rental, a little bit of gas, electricity, or whatever it is. So very affordable. But vets, obviously, quite a few of my vets bring their families. So they might say, right, we're all coming for a summer, and we're going to come for 3 months, and I'm going to bring my family and the kids. And at that point, then you can look for Airbnbs and stuff like that, or the clinic will help you find a larger accommodation if that's what you want. But yeah, the clinic always help. That's no problem at all. And again, if you're staying for a longer period of time, you're going to stay for 3 or 6 months, we always try and recommend our vets maybe drive themselves, make a bit of a road trip of it if they're coming from either the UK or another European country, spend a couple of days traveling to get there, because it's an adventure, it's fun, make it what it is, rather than trying to rush, headlong just to get from A to B. Whereas vets who are staying for short periods of time, it is possible to fly, but we try and encourage people to drive where possible and try and minimize their carbon footprint where we can, for sure. And also the other thing to think about is that many of our vets are coming back year on year. So you develop a good relationship with the clinic, and then you come back for a few months or a few weeks later on in the year, and that's very easy to manage and to do, for sure. And I'm really encouraged. In terms of pay, the other thing we probably didn't talk about necessarily was in pay and locum rates, and what people are being paid and what to expect. I suppose for locum pays, we try and manage that the pay in Scandinavia is benchmarked so similar to what you get in the UK as a locum. In Scandinavia, they tend to pay per hour rather than per day. So in UK, it's quite common to have a fixed day rate for that might be a 10 or 11 or 12 hour day. Whereas in Scandinavia, they have an 8 hour day, but it's paid per hour. So we tend to benchmark it around the £50 an hour mark. So in terms of euros, for an 8-hour day, most of our temporary vets are earning about €400 per day as a kind of average back of the envelope type calculation. And whereas full-time staff are earning probably, on average for base pay, they talk about base pay, they're talking about maybe €4,000 to €5,000 per month as a kind of base pay for a permanent vet, gives you a kind of rough idea of salary range and expectations for those. Yeah. A lot of the clinics like vets who are able to operate surgically on their own, so obviously with nursing support. So that's probably key as well. So not only do they have a bit of out of hours night experience, but could handle things like a pyometra or a splenectomy or cesarean section or foreign body, something like that. I mean, obviously that they're not expecting you to be a referral level soft tissue surgeon, but being able to handle
that's
one
just
thing
being a decent GP, isn't it? Really.
Exactly. One thing that's quite interesting is in Scandinavia, until quite recently, it was illegal to do routine neutering in cats and dogs. And one thing we haven't touched on is that
they saw it as a mutilation, didn't they?
They saw it as a mutilation. And although the law has changed in the last few years, you will still see quite a lot of pyometra cases. And so if I'm working a weekend shift in Scandinavia, it's not uncommon for me to see 3 or 4 pyometras come in requiring surgery. And a lot of the clinics don't, if you're working there, they don't really want to have to pay another vet to be a backup surgeon for you. So in an ideal world, you're able to crack on. You have fabulous nurses. The nurses are amazing anaesthetists and I mean, they're just so experienced, but they need someone that can do the cutting. And if you're that kind of vet that can handle a pyo and a splenectomy, then, and the odd occasional, scary GDV, then that's fine. And obviously, if you need help, they will bring people in to help you. That's not there. But ideally, they don't want to have to pay someone to be on backup.
Yeah, don't want to have somebody coming in all the time for a basic pyo or something.
Well, exactly. So, and again, for our European colleagues, particularly the younger ones who are maybe 3 to 5 years qualified, often don't have a lot of surgical experience because it's until they're a bit older. And so for our European colleagues who don't have that surgical experience, it's a case of, maybe people who are 7 to 8 years qualified who've now started to become more senior and doing more surgery, that's probably more helpful. Yeah.
Great. Hugo, if anybody's listening to the podcast and wants to know a bit more details, can we take your details, or can you shout them out now, and we'll also put them underneath in the sort of explanation?
Yeah, absolutely. So Nordic Locums, you can look at nordiclocums.com or info@Nordic Locums or hugo@nordiclocums.com. Any of those emails you can shout out, and email's the best to get in touch, or look at our website. There's a contact list within our website that you can send me an email, and we'll very happy to talk. I'm very happy to set up a call or a video call and just chat through opportunities. And I've got people who call me up and they say, look, I'm thinking of going in a couple of years' time, or I'm thinking of moving. And I'm always happy to talk to people and help them in any way, shape or form, whether they come on board through us or whether they just want some advice. I'm always happy to chat because, I really feel that, we should really be trying to promote, opportunities for colleagues to improve their welfare, and any opportunity. I'm really happy to talk.
Hugo, tusen tack. Thank you so much for your words of wisdom. It's been really great to chat today, and best of luck with the continued success and growth of the business.
Well, thank you very much, Anthony. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and to meeting your cat. I didn't catch your cat's name, by the way. They briefly came through.
Well, he's not my cat. I'm part of his staff, as you know.
Right.
And it's Buddy. He adopted us during the pandemic.
Right.
So nice. he's just here sitting on my knee as we speak. He is quite a character. He's about 17 now. So wow. I think he basically came here as a retirement home because it's a bit quieter than where he came from. So he's enjoying himself, aren't you, Buddy?
And his eyes and teeth are all in good condition, I hope.
Well, I have to say his teeth, he doesn't have many left. It took me a while to realise that if he did bite me, it was really just a bad suck rather than a bite. So, he's lost quite a lot of his teeth over time.
Okay.
But he's coping. He's doing well and enjoying retirement, aren't you, Bud?
Oh, good. Oh, well, send him my regards for sure. It's been an absolute pleasure, Anthony. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Hugo. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been another episode of VETchat. See you on another episode soon. Bye.
Take care, everyone.